So we're here with Jason Kander, a veteran and former Secretary of State of Missouri. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So in your book, you talk about the need for veterans to both recognize and get help for their trauma and how it took you years to recognize your PTSD. That can obviously be a tough journey, but what do you think is the most important step for other veterans who are struggling with their mental health to take? And what do you think our leaders should be doing to address this crisis?
So first for me, well, I guess I would start with this, is that I think one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that the reason that veterans don't go get help is that it's always about this feeling of like thinking that they're weak if they go get help. And like, I'm not saying that's not a factor at times, but I think it's overblown how much of a factor that is compared to a couple of other things, which is one, oftentimes, whether you're talking veteran or anybody else, people just aren't aware that you can get better, right? Like when you think about the depictions that we have of people with PTSD, like in movies and on TV, it's almost always people who are careening toward the bottom. They're beating their spouse and they're committing crimes, and that's actually pretty uncommon. What's much more common are people who have been treated for PTSD and achieved a version of post-traumatic growth and have kind of moved on with their lives and are doing very well. It's actually happening around us all the time, but it's never depicted. And so we all tend to think that PTSD is a terminal diagnosis, that it will end in you either ending your life or at a minimum ending your career because you won't have any job prospects. And so that's a diagnosis people tend to want to stay away from. But the truth is that it's actually very treatable. And so that's the first thing that I think people need to know. The second is that, at least for veterans, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we do, and this kind of goes into the what can leaders do about it. There's a very necessary form of brainwashing that happens when you go into the military. And I say necessary very purposefully, which is that the message that's sent to those of us in the service is what you're doing is no big deal, that somebody else has it worse. And there's a reason for that. It's because for people to keep doing difficult, frightening jobs, you've got to believe it's no big deal. For me to, as an Army intelligence officer in Afghanistan, keep going into meetings with people who might want to kidnap and kill me, I've got to believe like this isn't a big deal compared to what other people are doing. So I don't fault the military for that at all. My problem is that when we leave the military, we are not equipped with an explanation that helps us flip that switch off. Nobody sits you down and says, okay, actually, that was a pretty big deal. You were likely to have some issues with this. And even as we enter the military, we don't get sufficient training about what PTSD is, what it looks like, what it could feel like, which would allow us to spot it in ourselves and spot it in our fellow service members.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that you've mentioned is post-traumatic growth, which I think is an interesting term. And could you sort of explain what you mean by that and sort of how you think that could apply to people dealing with PTSD?
Yeah, well, look, post-traumatic growth is just simply having treated successfully PTSD. It doesn't, what I'm not saying is curing PTSD. That's not a thing. I mean, PTSD is an injury, but it's an injury based on things that happened to you, meaning it's based on memories. So you can't cure it because you're not going to erase the memories. But it's like any other injury. You treat it, you learn how to manage it, and then you go forward with your life. Before I went into the Army, I had to get surgery and physical therapy on my right knee. And because I was playing pickup football with some buddies and I was stupidly like, hey, we should absolutely play tackle. And one of my really good friends was like an all-state free safety in Texas, and I wasn't. And so I tore up my knee really good. So I had to fix it to go into the Army. Well, I did. And, now I'm 41 years old. I still play competitive baseball, not softball, but baseball. In order to do that, I got to ice my knee. I got to pop a couple Advil, but like I'm age adjusted, still pretty fast. I got to play center field. I can bunt for a hit. My point is like my knee still works. It bothers me. It can flare up on me. I just got to know how to manage it. I got to know what to do with it. PTSD is no different in my life. I still have PTSD, but I understand things like, if it still happens occasionally, get nightmares. I understand, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do during the day. I wasn't processing certain memories and certain feelings. I was avoiding them. And so my subconscious is going to deal with them while I'm asleep. If I don't want that to happen, I got to deal with those emotions and those memories during the day, which I do. And there's lots of stuff like that, meaning There's no job I can't do. There's no reason to have PTSD consistently disrupt my life. It doesn't have to, so long as I take care of it. Just like I got to ice my knee if I want to be able to, make some good plays in center field. It's no different.
Mhm.